Is this microphone working? Someone say hi in the chat if you can hear me, please. Awesome. So I didn't know until, like 15 minutes ago that Patreon just runs their live streams through YouTube. So I probably could have set up a better microphone situation. But uh, according to the chat, this sounds great. So we're good. Yeah, I'll probably wait a few minutes to really get started. I don't expect a lot of people to show up to this first live stream, but I wanted to do it on the first one on Patreon because, obviously this is where I have received the most support for the show, both monetarily and morally. I would say the people who've been on Patreon, especially during the time between season 1 and season 2, that took longer than I expected it to take, and there was a lot of questioning uh, regarding like my mental state and even like basically whether or not I was a con artist or something. Uh, so everyone who supported me on Patreon during that time ha- had a lot of faith in me, um, and that meant a lot. So I wanted to start this off here, and I would like to continue prioritizing things on Patreon. This is also available for everyone to see. I think even if you're not like a Patreon supporter right now, I think this is publicly available. I've never done a live stream on YouTube, but I think I have it set that way. So I am just going to start talking about this book that I have coming out in September. If anyone has questions, just throw them in the chat. I will try to, scroll up periodically and just check for things that I missed. This doesn't really have a format to it. I don't have anything planned at all. I would like to just keep this casual and, pretty stress free if at all possible. The leap from making Cocaine and Rhinestones available as a podcast to publishing it as a book is, in some ways obvious, but when it comes to how to actually do that, there are a lot of things that need to be considered. I did not have designs on becoming a published author really at any time in my life. I never thought I was going to be person talking about country music history. I never thought I was going to start a podcast, and I certainly never thought I was going to be a published author at any point in my life. So this is all really just a product of things falling in line after taking a certain course of action. So after season 1, I got a lot of people contacting me through my email inbox mostly. People wanted the rights to adapt Cocaine and Rhinestones as a TV show. People wanted to make documentaries based on it, and I had a lot of interest from book agents who wanted to represent me to publish what I had done as a book. And by the time I started getting to that in my just keeping up with correspondence, I had already realized that season 2 was going to take a lot more work and a lot more time than I had originally thought. So I told almost everyone to just chill, essentially. I told everyone looking for adaptations or like to license the rights or anything like that, even merchandising that, people wanted to make t-shirts right away. and I had some really good offers, but I was aware of the potential optics of that situation. I was aware that if I took much longer than I thought it was going to take to come out with season two, but I did use that time to, get merchandise made up and start selling t-shirts before I had more episodes coming out, that would add more fuel to the flames of, everyone who was claiming that I was a con artist and just taking people's money and had no intention of continuing to make the show. So I just put everything on the back burner except for the TV slash documentary rights. I'm aware that that was a situation of I should do this now, uh, just because of how chaotic the Hollywood is, basically how chaotic the television and movie industry is. If something can go into production and stay in what they call production hell for years without ever actually getting made. So if there's momentum, you have to take it. So I did try to make that happen, and I partnered with a great team, with Mark Herzog's production company. He does a lot of documentaries for CNN. If you've ever seen those documentaries on the decades, I think they're just called like the 80s, the 90s. His production company did those. They're fantastic. And I had a great agent, a great production company, and we got meetings with everyone, like a pitch meeting with every streamer and network that you could possibly want to talk to, and they all passed. So that's fine, they passed. It's fine. I didn't like have my heart set on it. It was just a matter of following through on something while there was momentum there. So then I just got back to work on season two, and then after it came out, as it was ready to come out, I was able to circle back around, get merchandise made, and then start talking about what to do as a book. And I knew that season two was gonna look roughly like it did the whole time that I made season one. I knew it was going to be the story of George Jones and Tammy Wynette. Um, I didn't know a lot of other stuff about season two, like how it was going to end up looking, but the way that it came out, it seemed pretty obvious to me that I had sort of stumbled into creating something that was uh, kind of beyond what I had intended to make, and beyond really what I even thought I was able to make. In the process of making season two, writing season two, researching it, there were times where I was just sort of following a thread and not really knowing why I was following that thread until it was done. And then once I could step back and look at the thing as a whole, it really, in some ways, felt like I was looking at something that I didn't even do. In some ways, it felt like someone else had done this, and I'm just like watching it happen with everyone else. Um, but when it came time to seriously pursue making a book, it was pretty obvious to me that it should just be season two. Like, I wrote it as a book, kind of. The whole process of making season two as a podcast is very similar to the process of writing a nonfiction book. I didn't know that until doing all this stuff with the book, but I basically did write a book, and then in the editing process of the podcast, turned it into a podcast. I wrote all of those sentences just on a blank document, a blank piece of paper. So I was just writing sentences the way that I would write them down, and then later I read them out loud to myself with headphones on to hear how the words sound, and then I changed them for the sake of audio, and then it gets edited with all the clips and everything. um so the process of turning that into a book was essentially just working backwards. I sort of went back through what the scripts were, and made modifications. So I've had a lot of people asking me what are the differences between uh, season two as a podcast and season two as a book. And there are kind of some huge differences, uh, namely the Dallas Frazier episode, the Dallas Frazier part of the Dallas Frazier episode is not in the book, and that is because that episode was a result of polls that I ran on Patreon. I knew that I had an option of telling the story of either a prominent songwriter in country music or a prominent A-team studio musician in country music. So I ran a series of polls on Patreon to determine first whether it would be the songwriter or the musician. Next, there were several songwriters who would have made total sense to include as part of the story. And I did not want it to come down to a popularity contest. So I found a way to sort of anonymize the identities of different songwriters. I just sort of described the characteristics of their personalities and what would be covered in their stories, and Dallas Frazier is the one that came out. So that's why it's in there. It could fit in there, but it was not necessary for the rest of the story to take place the way that it did. But even there were some pretty interesting things. Like a moment ago, I was talking about how I didn't plan all of the connections that ended up being there. Um, and one that worked out pretty great was as of the time of recording, the last Dallas Frazier release to come out had a song called Carousel Girl on it. And I thought it was the best song on that album. And there was all the stuff in other episodes in the season about carousels, like the history of how carousels got started and everything. And of course, the reason why that content is there is because those aspects of early modern history in Europe really dictated so much of the culture around country music. So, the reason why carousels were talked about in the book is the same reason that Dallas Frazier has a song called Carousel Girl. But that was one of those really cool connections that ended up working out as a result of not even something that I had planned. I left this up to a series of Patreon polls, and that came out the other side of it. So there were all these like little magical things that fell in place like that. But that being said, um, as a writer, you have to sometimes get rid of the magical things that you love so much. And one concern with turning the season two into a book was just the size of it. It was something like over 30 something hours of audio. I don't know what that would have translated to in page count. So first thing is like cut everything that you can. We've got to get people to buy a book in the year 2023, which that alone is a challenge. Getting people to buy a huge book is a much bigger challenge. So and then also there's a difference between like reading a story on paper and having a story read to you, essentially, which is what the podcast is. So there are things that are moved around. Like in the podcast, it made sense because I can make you listen to clips that I think you need to hear to understand what I'm talking about. In the podcast, it makes sense to have that sort of 3-episode prologue on season 2, where it's very heavy on details about the music. Like these are the things that you need to understand about country music in this period and before this period. And if we can get all of this out of the way first, then you will understand all of the music that you're about to hear in the middle of this crazy fucking story that I'm about to tell you. And if I didn't do that way, then there would have been a lot of getting away from the action once it got into season 2, once it got into the story of George Jones and into the story of Tammy Wynette, and there are some reasons to dive over into a deep unpacking of the music in real time with the story, in the chronological timeline of the story. And I do a lot of that, but I would have had to do much more if I didn't get that Nashville sound, the Owen Bradley, the Nashville A Team, all those episodes, all those like arguments out of the way, the whole Chet Atkins, Owen Bradley thing. Like, you need to understand who Owen Bradley was. So later I can just refer to how influential he was on this George Jones recording session that Owen Bradley wasn't even in the room for, in order for me to be able to dive into, um, what did I call it? Semantic ambiguity in songwriting later. In order for me to spend that much time on that, I need to not also be diving into 3 other sidebars. So in the podcast, it makes a lot of sense to get all those arguments out of the way. But in the book, you got to get to the story right away. Like, people are already going to be confused. With the book, because for the same reasons that they were confused with my approach to the podcast. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that confusion can be an incredibly powerful tool for grabbing someone's attention. And the reality is, anyone who's not going to push past the initial why am I reading about pinball machines right now, anyone who's not willing to just give themselves over to the idea that this might be interesting, even though they don't know why they're reading it, they're not going to like the book. They're not going to like the way that I tell stories. So, it's fine, but you can only push it so far, especially if it's the first time that someone is sitting down with your work. My hope is that this book reaches a lot of people who would never give the podcast the time of day, reaches a lot of people who have no idea who I am or what I've been doing with this work. So yeah, Dallas Frazier episode is mostly gone. The intro of it has been reworked to fit elsewhere in the story. The book does not open with the whole Owen Bradley, Nashville A Team, all of that stuff. It does open with Star Day and then jumps right into White Lightning. But when you zoom in, there are a lot of sections. Probably the vast majority of the book is the same as the podcast. Like, when I sat down to write season 2, the episodes in season 2, I didn't think I need to hold something back because I'm going to publish this as a book later. I didn't think, oh, I'm not going to reveal this, like, if it was important, it's in the book. And if it's a good sentence, it's in the book, because like, I wrote those sentences to the best of my ability. It was like operating on a 10 out of 10 the whole time as a writer. So I am not gonna, reword things just for the sake of being able to say that this book is different. This is very much meant to provide the experience of season 2 as a book. And as I talked about on the podcast, I can just make you listen to what I think you need to listen to. In a book, it's different. Uh, there are a lot of books on these shelves behind me that were written, decades prior to the internet, and I don't know how they went over at the time, but it seems like most folks could not have really been engaged with. Sometimes there are just pages and pages where the author's just listing songs, like listing artist and song title, and unless you're prepared to spend, your life digging through shelves at record stores, and hopefully they'll let you listen to them before that you buy them, or buying them and taking them home, whatever. Like, a lot of people who read these books are never going to hear these songs. Now it's different. Now you can just pause and go to YouTube, and the song is going to be there and you can hear it. So my solution to that problem is just the intro at the beginning, just a foreword, just a quick thing that says, look, this is a book about music, and the only time I'm mentioning a song by title is if I think it would be useful for you to hear that song, regardless of whether it's a good song or a bad song. It is representative of a point that is being made. So, the foreword is just like, hey, take the time to go listen to all these songs. If you really want to find out what I'm talking about, you're not going to be able to understand it unless you go listen to um, this music. And all right, I'm just gonna check on some of these questions. I see a lot of question marks. I want to make sure that any of this stuff is relevant to what I'm talking about already. Okay, so yeah, first question, how the listening aspect is treated in the book. Is there a suggested list for each chapter section? So this was something that was brought up as an idea, and I think it would have been a good idea if I was going to sort of do a different book, like approach the story in a completely different way, like a beginner's guide to the music of George Jones and Tammy Wynette or something like that. That would have been really light on the story. And then, more like I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but just the format of it, like George Jones and Tammy Wynette for Dummies, those big orange books. Like they always have those little sections at the end, like recommended action or whatever, depending upon what the book is. And yeah, it would have been formatted something like that. And that, that was brought up as an option. Do you want to try to make something that maybe has more widespread appeal than a epic giant saga that you don't explain why you're doing all of the things that you're doing? And ultimately I decided no. There have been so many takes on the George Jones and Tammy Wynette story, and I feel like what I did with season 2 was something that needed to be done, and I didn't want to walk that back, in any way. I think that it needs to just be there like it is, and it reminds me of the part where I'm talking about how Emmylou Harris was a college student and she was part of that group of people who made mixtapes for each other, their favorite George Jones recordings. That's really who this is for, is people like that. And anyone who's not going to uh, take it upon themselves to do some of the work and listen to the music, maybe they appreciate the story just for the sake of the story, and that's cool and everything. But whatever difference it would make for me to provide playlist that someone could just go hit play on or whatever, I don't really care to find out if it would, you know, be more popular to make it easier for people. Um, I'm just, I don't know. And I also feel like I'm not the only one who feels this way now. I am really frustrated with a lot of documentaries that get made. It just feels like they're trying to like hold your hand the entire time and walk you through what this is. And I don't think that people need that as much as the, you know, New York City and LA content creators think that they do. And even if they do, I don't want to spend the rest of my life creating things for an audience that needs their hand held. I would rather, you know, get bad reviews. I would rather and I do. I don't get a lot of them, but I do get some. If you go to the podcasts on Apple Podcasts, and I don't know if you can sort by 1 star or 2 star reviews, but I mean, all the time there, or not all the time, every now and then someone will pop up and be like, "Is something wrong with this podcast feed? He keeps talking about jousting, and I don't understand what's going on." And yeah, that's just like a tax that I have to pay, I guess, to do this the way that I want to do it. But the positive thing on the other side of it is that I get to spend the rest of my life doing, what I want. I get to do what I want to do, and people who like it, and there are plenty of them, people who like it and get it, don't feel condescended to. Um, I don't believe that the vast majority of my audience thinks I'm ever like talking down to them or assuming that they're too stupid to understand something, because I'm always doing the exact opposite. I'm always assuming that people get what's going on. And Yeah, I like that. And then even if someone doesn't get a particular thing, someone who's a fan and they're just like, I don't understand why this one thing happened. What tends to take place next is that person finds somewhere online, they go to social media or wherever, and they ask a question about the show, and other people who listen to the show arrive, and now they're having a conversation about this, which is great. That's great. It's amazing that someone could be a little confused and go on social media to ask a question about something, and now we're all talking about country music from 60 years ago, and this is the most interesting thing right now. That's great, especially with the deluge of information that is available at all times. I've already ordered 3 copies. That's amazing. Thank you. Very excited. So difficulties in translating the podcast to a book. I mean, I've already gone over a lot of them. It's really a matter of, does this sentence make the point that I need it to make on the page? And there are a ton of very small changes, but all the changes are there in order to, hopefully, in order to induce the same effect that the words I speak on the podcast have when you hear them. So yeah, every change is there to provide the same experience. And then I think that um, having a book, when you have a physical book in front of you, there are all these connections in the story that I put in there. Uh, like, you'll hear something and be like, oh, maybe that's why he was talking about this other thing earlier. On the podcast, if you decide to go listen to the thing that I was talking about earlier, it's kind of a pain in the ass, like scrubbing through the audio and trying to remember where you heard me say it, et cetera, et cetera. With the book, you can just like flip back and scan the words so much easier than scrubbing through audio. Plus, I haven't seen it yet. Simon and Schuster is the one who compiles this, but the book is going to have an index in it, so you can just go to the back and see. Like, and this is something that I told people to do as well. Like, if you're confused as to why I'm talking about something, do a search for that word on the Cocaine and Rhinestones website and see how many different episodes that keyword comes up in, and it's because this is a through line. So I think in a lot of ways the book will make it make the story easier to parse and process and revisit. And that's my hope, at least. Have you seen the BBC Science Show Connections? I've not. This has definitely come up before when I did a Q&A. Other listeners have said that the way I tell stories reminds them of that. Whoop. I think I just speed scrolled past a bunch of stuff. An interviewer asked Billy Sherrill something akin to, how do you explain George Jones? He answered that he stopped trying. You clearly understand the depth of his gift. How would you answer that? So this isn't something that I like to rely on. I never hold this up as a reason why you should listen to me, or a reason why I know what I'm talking about. Like, this is true, therefore you should just believe me. But I do think that there is something that comes with country music never having been alien to me. Um, I would say the vast majority of people who have ever published a book on the topic of country music at one time in their lives did not really have it around them. They did not grow up listening to it from day one. And or if they did, it was weird that they did, and they grew up with an awareness of that. Most books get published out of New York and LA. Most people who tell stories that get seen, read, heard by millions of people are coming out of New York and LA. And they don't know these stories like I do. Because of where they come from. And I'm not saying that they can't appreciate the music. I'm not saying that they can't appreciate the stories because of where they come from. I'm just saying that they are standing physically, almost standing in a different spot and looking at this stuff from a different angle than I do. Um, so, with George Jones specifically, my whole life, anyone who only knows three things about George Jones, two of them are embarrassing and not even probably true the way that they talk about them. And it's devastating to know the truth about someone and then just have them be a joke, pretty much. Most people who know anything about George Jones, all it is that fucking lawnmower story. And they think that's funny, which it's not. So, that's two strikes right there. Uh, or they think it's badass, which is also not that. So right away, if the person telling you about George Jones thinks that the lawnmower story is funny or cool, then you've got a pretty big problem. Um, and then the other issues that come with this, so like the problem with George Jones is sort of the problem with Tammy Wynette as far as the popular understanding of who they were as people. Uh, Tammy Wynette is very akin to someone like Patsy Cline or Johnny Cash in that she is a common exception when someone is saying that they don't listen to country music. It'll be, I don't listen to country music except this, Johnny Cash, Patsy Cline, Tammy Wynette. And that is an intentional byproduct of who was behind those careers and what they were trying to accomplish. Uh, Johnny Cash was marketed to an audience outside of country music. Patsy Cline, the music was made from the ground up to appeal to an audience that doesn't give a shit about country music. And same thing with Tammy Wynette. So when you get a pop culture audience paying attention to country music, they're doing it in a very different way. And that's not always negative, although a lot of the attention paid to Tammy Wynette by consumers of pop culture media was negative. Her name was basically a two-word joke to a lot of people for most of her life. And just the Stand By Your Man controversy alone, Google Stand By Your Man Hillary Clinton, if you don't know what I'm talking about. But yeah, that's one way that New York and LA see country music. And then the other way is a fetish, where you've got writers. The epitome of this to me is fuck, what's his name? No, I'm not going to be able to remember it. The guy who wrote Nick Tosches. Him, like his engagement with country music is, I think, has been, close to net negative, if not entirely, because he was, clearly a misogynist. He says some extremely misogynist things in the course of his career. And I think that his attraction to characters like Jerry Lee Lewis was, look at this fucked up hillbilly, basically. And, which is sort of the same attitude that the Mike Judge cartoon TV show seemed to be coming at the genre with. And that's stupid and reductive and not, it doesn't get anyone anywhere as far as understanding, who these people were or what this music is. So yeah, those are the main things that you get from others. And I don't, I could think of, people like me who grew up in country music and would be in a position to do the same work that I'm doing. They've got a lot of other stuff going on besides this, and this is a lot of work. And, if I had something else to do, like if I felt the need to make original music, which I, never really did, uh, I would probably be doing that instead of this because it's not as much work. I can tell you that for a fact. Um, so yeah, as far as my understanding of the depth of his gift, it's been, my whole life I have been aware of a massive misunderstanding when it comes to George Jones, and even among country music fans, because they were the consumer that was being targeted with this approach to making not only the music but the personas. Like Billy Sherrill and his stable of songwriters were intentionally crafting an image of George Jones and Tammy Wynette and selling it to people. So, like, because of how successful George Jones and Tammy Wynette was, that is directly proportional to how many people have a mistaken idea or mistaken beliefs about these two people, is because they bought the product. It was a product, it was being sold to them, and the vast majority of people who bought that product believe in the product. So, that, like, there's no way that everyone understands the truth about this. So beyond just growing up around country music, as a lot of people who believe all of these fictions, dude, I mean, I grew up in this world. Like, I'm from ground zero of this shit. I was born in 1984. My father's producer was Billy Sherrill. Like, he came to my birthday parties. He came to my sister's birthday parties when I was a kid. I was in the studio I was around this stuff. Like, I saw this stuff happen. And again, I do not lean on this ever. At no point in season 2 did I say I was there, listen to me. Because that's useless. Like, I would not regard that as good enough um, when sourcing information for stories that I was not there for. I can't just take one person's word for it. I need multiple sources. And if there is only one person saying one thing, then I need to look at what they're saying, look at the reality of the situation according to every other source, and gauge whether or not they could be wrong, could be being dishonest. Like, I was there just doesn't hold a lot of water for me. So when it comes to other people's stories. So I can't lean on it when it comes to myself, but it does help, in season 1, the Jeannie C. Riley episode, similar to Tammy Wynette's autobiography, reading the book, I, there are lies in the book that just jump out to me. When it comes to Jeannie C. Riley, it's because Shelby Singleton is another person that I was around a lot in childhood and for the rest of his life. He would show up whenever we were in the area. He would come to concerts. I was around him a lot, and I knew him. I knew who he was, and I knew how he talked and everything. So reading the Jeannie C. Riley book, I'm just like, well, this is bullshit. But I can't just say that. I can't say I knew that guy. That's clearly not true. I've got to go look into why. So, at best, it gives me a feeling, it gives me a sense that things may not be as they seem. And that is what leads me to go look into what other facts I can dig up. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from. All right, I'm gonna catch up on the chat here for a second. Take a drink of water. Is the book in the format of a coffee table book? Lots of photos and illustrations. No. So I was supposed to have a what they call a dummy book, which is the real cover printed up on and wrapped onto a different book that is the same size. That was supposed to be here on Friday. I don't know what happened with UPS the second day air. It's not going to be here until tomorrow. I should have it for tomorrow's stream so I can show you exactly the dimensions of the book. But what I did instead is I got out a tape measure and I just measured a bunch of books on my shelf to find one that is about the same size. So Tattooed on Their Tongues, Colin Scott. This is a really good book. I've definitely recommended it. So this is about 9 inches tall here. which is roughly the height of my book, and the width is a little over 7 inches, which is also roughly the height of my book. Sorry, I'm trying to get rid of the glare. So it's gonna be about this size, probably twice as thick as this. So that's like roughly what we're talking about. It's a pretty big book. Uh, it's not gonna have a dust jacket like this. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to hold this. Okay, so a lot of books, hardcovers have this dust jacket. We're actually doing something. We're doing something that's going to look more like this. This is the library book by Susan Orlean. She's great. So this is a hardcover, and there's no dust jacket. It's just the cover is printed directly on the board of the book. I like the way this looks more. And as someone who reads a ton of books, I'm constantly trying to figure out what to do with a dust jacket while I'm reading the books so that the dust jacket doesn't get fucked up. And I haven't found a good solution to that. Like, I always manage to fuck up the dust jacket. I'll just take it off and I'll try to put it somewhere safe, and then it's not safe and it gets fucked up. So, no dust jacket, hardcover like this, but the dimensions are more like this. Um, and as for photos and illustrations throughout, no, we're going with more of a what I think is like a classic approach to illustrations in a book. I feel like when I was a kid, most of the books that I would read, if they had illustrations in them, it would just be like a full page illustration opening each chapter. So that's what this is going to be. And I guess I can start showing off some of the artwork now. Just while talking, I tried to position this to where I could just leave both of us on screen at the same time. So yeah, chapter 1 is still going to be the Starday story, Starday Records, and that opens with the intro on pinball. And these are just fantastic. Like, I don't know how familiar y'all are with Wayne White as an artist. He probably like the most notable early thing that he did was the set design on the TV show Pee-wee's Playhouse, which is just like iconic as far as that world goes. And then he also did the art direction for the Smashing Pumpkins music video Tonight Tonight. And I think Big Time, a Peter Gabriel video for sure. I think it was Big Time. But then more recently, he has been doing what he just calls them word paintings. I don't know if there's like a fancier name for them, but in conversation with him, he calls them word paintings, where he just goes and finds these like generic hotel room mass reproduced pieces of art that are very generic and commercial. And he takes them and just paints words over them. And the techniques that he does to do that are really impressive. I can't draw at all, so everything he does is like magic to me. But even beyond my limited understanding, what he does is clearly phenomenal. And then it's sort of been like a side project for him, it seems like. But he also does in various mediums. He does a lot of country music stuff. Like, he listens to country music. He's a big fan of the podcast, and he does sketches, paintings of famous country figures. So at one point he reached out and said that he would like to donate a piece of art for me to use as merchandise, and that is now the cover of the book, that George Jones and Tammy Wynette painting. And when it came time to do the book, the standard, when you sign a contract with a publisher, it's specified that the author is responsible for securing the rights to photographs or whatever else, and providing those. And I just felt like that had been done. all the books about George Jones and Tammy Wynette have pictures in them, and I don't want to go secure rights to use the same images as everyone else. I don't want to use different pictures just because they're different. And what I'm doing is different. Like the way that I approached the text of this story is radically different than anyone else ever has. So why not have the art also follow suit? And we'll get into it. I've got all of the illustrations right here. I can just, pull one and leave them there while I talk about other stuff. This is for the Moonshine chapter. Oh, and then so like how the formatting will work with the chapters is, so like chapter 1 is pinball, and then it goes right into the Stardate story the same way that the intro and episode do. But then after that, most of the chapters, what would have been the intro in the podcast is actually its own independent chapter. So chapter 1 in the book will be pinball and Starday, and then chapter 2 in the book is just the whole intro on moonshine and prohibition, popcorn Sutton, and all that stuff. So that's chapter 2. So the illustration opening chapter 2 is a moonshine still. And you're going to see there were some splatters and spills in that first pinball one, but you're going to see a lot of these in the rest of these. I hope this is coming through with a lot of detail and it's not pixelated or anything garbage like that. This stuff is really incredible. And then one of the things we had to figure out was how these were actually going to look in the book. Sort of the working assumption from everyone was that these would be printed full page, because of how, like, this one bleeds all the way down to the bottom, those spills, and that's intentional. It's supposed to look that way. I love that look. But then as soon as I got sent the first digital sample of the way that this would look full page, I realized these are all, as you'll see, they're different types of paper. Wayne used a bunch of different papers that have different like grain, and that's very visible, especially with the spills. Like, you can see the texture of the page, and I love that. It looks really, really cool. But printing them full page, it kind of would look weird to have them full page, because the texture of the paper behind each drawing is not going to match the physical texture of the physical piece of paper that it's printed on and that you're reading through the whole book. So if you're reading the book and you're this isn't something that most people are really aware of as they're reading a book, but you are registering the grain and texture of the paper on the book as you're reading. So then you flip, and then all of a sudden this entire page looks radically different because it is artwork that was drawn on a page with a different grain. So that is one reason. And then another reason is the book is going to be pretty thick. I think it's going to be about 544 pages. So the thicker the book is, the deeper the seam is, like the crease. There will be more of the page lost into the binding at the center of the book. So, as you'll see, some of these really are full page. So I didn't want to lose the whole right side of a bunch of these images into the crease of the book. So we realized that it can't be full page. It's got to come down some. And then I didn't really want to add anything to it, because these are complete. These are complete pieces of work. And but they do need to have some sort of framing on the page. You can't just reduce the size and have it be a scan, just like an island in the middle there. So we just put a plain gray border around these images facing each chapter. So you'll have illustration on the left side, and then the first page of the chapter on the right side. So then chapter 2 is all the moonshine, federal prohibition stuff. This is incredible right here. And then it'll go into the white lightning chapter about that song and everything. And as you can see, like, this is the right side of this. So if we had printed this full page, it would cut into the circle. And I don't want to do that. There's a lot of stuff going on visually, motifs that Wayne uses throughout. And I am the kind of person where if I have an opportunity to talk to an artist that I like, I never ask them to explain anything that they have not explained. So I haven't, like, had conversations with Wayne about this, but I have ideas about what I think he's doing and why. And I think most astute observers will be able to put together similar ideas about the recurring visual motifs in this artwork, but I have made the decision that I'm not going to quote unquote explain what I think is going on. Even though this is based off material you had already written, I'm curious if the book writing process scratched a new creative itch for you in a way you weren't expecting going in. Man, honestly, not really. I don't engage with writing or talking about writing in a way that is similar to how most authors do. A lot of authors talk about writing as just like torturous process, and they, all these jokes and memes about procrastinating instead of writing. And I think that is really, just deeply uncool thing to do. That being said, I find the act of writing from scratch to be like the least enjoyable part of this process. Once that's done, I love everything else about it, like editing and everything like that. But I do all that for the podcast already. So the process of turning this into a book was essentially taking another pass at the scripts and editing them to work in book form. And as I've already talked about, that's like taking big chunks and getting rid of them or rearranging them. And then on a word by word basis, like, I'm a very granular editor when it comes to the speaking parts on Cocaine and Rhinestones. Like, every word is there because it's the word that made the most sense to me at the time, even if it's grammatically incorrect or whatever. So turning it into the book was just kind of like doing another editing part. But then after that, uh, it's a lot of arguing with a nonfiction book, and one that is as data dense or as heavy on facts as one such as mine, and also one that is as opinionated as mine. It's a lot of arguing over what you are and aren't allowed to say, and I am really good at arguing, but I don't enjoy it. So a lot of this, as far as like the grunt work of this, a lot of it has been a ton of work for me, and a lot more than I expected. Um, I knew it wasn't going to be as simple as let's print the transcripts, because I wouldn't have wanted to do that even if it was. But it turned out to be a lot more work than I was expecting, to take something that was already released into the world and just, reformatting it to make sense as a book. I assumed would not be, a ton of work, and it has been a ton of work, but very little creative work. It's just really been a lot of sort of like satellite issues, like outside and separate from the creative process. I'm going to try to check up on some more questions here. I feel like I've been talking for a while. Thank you to everyone who's saying thank you, and thank you to everyone who's ordering the book. I live in the Beaumont, Texas area, and was able to find the location where Stardate was during that time. The building is currently a honky tonk that I've been to. That's awesome. I did not know that. the Starday King studio building was like 3 miles down the road from my apartment for a while, but has since been demolished, and I doubt they have anything cool planned to go in there. My neighborhood in East Nashville is getting very quote unquote interesting lately. Since there are differences between the book and the original podcast, will there be an audio version available? I haven't read it yet. I actually just got the email today from Simon and Schuster's audiobook department. So we back in the original pitch meetings, when it was time to pursue a book deal, I went up to New York City and I met with all the publishing houses. So in all of those meetings, all of this stuff gets batted about. We're talking, about possibilities for this, and this. That's like when I first brought up the idea that maybe Wayne White would be interested in doing illustrations for the whole book. And this is a podcast. How are we going to make an audiobook? That obviously came up, and we haven't made any decisions yet. So I don't know what the differences are going to be in the audio version, but there should be an audio version. I assume there will be an audio version. I've also had a lot of questions about, will the book be available in other countries? I think so. Yeah. I think it kind of depends on how well the US edition does first. So if you want this cover the way that it looks, then probably look into importing it, because I don't know that the UK or European or wherever else, I don't know that those editions will look exactly like this. But yeah, that's all on the table. That's all laid out in the deal. So I assume that there will be other versions. Sorry, just catching up on these. Came to your podcast through Andrew Hickey's History of Rock Music in 500 Songs. Do you have other favorite music podcasts in other genres? Unfortunately, no. So, like, one of the dirty secrets about making a music podcast is that you don't have time to listen to music podcasts. A lot of people listen to podcasts, when they're at work. I can't do that because when I'm at work, I'm listening to my own podcast or I'm listening to music. I can't if I'm writing sentences into that blank document, I really have a hard time doing that while listening to music that has language in it. Any songs that have English words in them, I'm gonna fuck up and type the word that this person just sang into my ear instead of the word that I meant to write. So I don't actively listen to any podcasts of any variety. I mean, I've listened to enough of Andrew Hickey to know that his podcast is good. So, that's a great podcast. I unfortunately don't have, any others that I could recommend. I was not a listener of podcasts for very long before I started making them. I didn't listen to podcasts for a very long time. Before I was working on podcasts, I did this website called drunkmall.com. And for that website, I was also working in marketing. So that website was basically writing a pitch for every post that was on there. Like every product that got posted on there, I would have to write a thing. And I was doing 3 new posts every day for a week. So 21, and then like a mega post once a week, like a gift guide, and then a giveaway that I would coordinate with all of these people who made the products that I was posting about. So just a ton of writing. And so same thing, like I couldn't listen to people talking about something else while I was writing all this stuff. What got me into listening to podcasts was I still have a lot of physical body damage issues from being a touring musician. I played heavy Gibson SG guitars nearly the entire time that I was on tour. So like close to 13 years, 3 to 7 shows a week, bad posture, drinking, just doing no kind of uh, physical therapy for myself, like no massage therapy, no exercising for most of the time that I was on tour. And these problems made themselves evident towards the end of the time that I was on tour. So I did start taking care of myself, but it's still a lot to keep up with. I have a lot of shoulder issues and a lot of hip issues. So the most effective physical therapy that I have found involves like rolling around on foam rollers and lacrosse balls and using these compression bands. And it at the time that I started working on or listening to podcasts, I was having to do this like 45 to 90 minutes a night, just like rolling around on the ground. You can't really look in one direction. So watching TV was kind of out. And that's how I got into listening to podcasts. Pretty soon after I started listening to podcasts, I thought, oh, there must be a great one about country music stories. And there wasn't. So then that's when I started thinking about maybe I should do this. So it pretty quickly went from I don't listen to podcasts to I listen to podcasts to I make podcasts. And uh, once I started making podcasts, you don't have the audio availability to listen to more. All right, I'm gonna just kind of work through these to try to get through them while talking about whatever else I'm talking about. So yeah, you can see right here, this is like a very different piece of paper. The color of it even catches the light differently and looks like a different color because of the grain. It's a much more textured kind of paper. And so this is going to obviously be the Owen Bradley / Nashville A Team chapter. So yeah, I reordered those in the book instead of the A Team Nashville Sound prologue that the audio podcast has. It goes Stardate Records, George Jones, White Lightning, and then goes back to Nashville for sort of a mashup of the Owen Bradley and A Team episodes. And there, I had to cut a lot of stuff for this to work. When in the like that's a very clip heavy section of the podcast. The first few episodes have way more musical clips than the later episodes. And that's because of the nature of what those episodes are meant to accomplish. I'm trying to get you to understand these concepts about the recording process, what Nashville was doing, how influential it was elsewhere, and everything like that. So the clip heavy sections of the podcast in the book, that's what you really have to focus on reworking. Because I'm not just going to sit here and list songs at you, because a lot of people will just tune out. I would just tune out if I was just reading a list of songs. It's really hard to sit there and just read a list of songs. So the Nashville A Team and Owen Bradley episodes of the podcast got trimmed down and spliced together in a way that does work as the book, but it is just one chapter. And then after that, we jump right into the thread that begins with bullfighting and ends with all of the Catherine de Medici stuff. So we have some classic pre-Matador prestige bullfighting imagery here. And then the thing that I really like about Wayne as an illustrator for this story, I mean, like, I don't know if y'all can see sort of the action of those blurs, but those little spots to me sort of imply a type of motion. And a lot of these images are based on, famous images that we have in our heads of these people as performers, like George Jones standing at a microphone with a guitar is something that we can all call up in our memories. But especially if you can get into the detail of it, the way that Wayne like scribbles these forms into an image sort of implies a visual parallel to what I'm doing with the story. You know, the like George Jones standing at a guitar, or George Jones standing at a microphone with a guitar is a famous image that we all have because it was put in front of us. It was sold to us. Like him as an entertainer was packaged this way for us. And what I do as a storyteller is sort of take that apart. Like, okay, here's everything you think you know about George Jones, but here is a way different way of looking at that. And I think that Wayne's illustrations do the same thing. Like, here's an image that you think you have of George Jones, but the way that I'm putting it in front of you makes you look at it in a different way. Do I intend to tour the book? Yes, as part of my deal with Simon and Schuster, I have to make myself available to promote the book at live events. None of that has been booked yet, so I don't know where I'm going or when or anything like that. Sorry, it's getting kind of warm in here. Will we be able to get signed copies of the book? Yeah, I mean, I assume that I will be doing signings at those places. What was the biggest unforeseen obstacle so far in getting the book published? I there I mean, aside from it just being a lot of work, I wouldn't call anything an obstacle. Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it's just more work than I thought it would be, and a lot of answering questions. You know, thankfully, as a byproduct of my research process, I have like all of my notes still. And, you know, I gave away the physical copies of books that I used for research in season one. I am going to do the same thing with season two, but I just sort of had a feeling that I should hang on to the actual books that I read and wrote in. So I kept those, and then I like definitely was a good idea that I kept them. So yeah, I still have the box of the main sources for season two. Uh, but yeah, that's only as a result of just feeling like I should probably keep them until this thing got all the way through to the end without any problems. Uh, I've never thought of Patsy or Tammy as anything other than country artists, but it's interesting to hear they weren't ever marketed to be such. I mean, well, they were marketed as country artists, but not only to an audience of country people is the difference. You know, they were unquestionably country singers. Like Patsy Cline was constantly arguing with Owen Bradley about not wanting to record things because she didn't think that they were country enough, or that, you know, people would think that she was turning her back on country music. Tammy Wynette had the same concerns. As I mentioned with Stand By Your Man, she was worried that it wasn't even a country song. She thought it was just going to come off as like R&B, and she didn't want her audience to think that she was turning her back on country music. But what Billy Sherrill was concerned with was taking a country musician, country singer, country songs, and selling them to people who wouldn't normally buy country music. So he wanted fans of country music to buy it, but he also wanted people who don't know anything or care anything about country music to buy it. And, you know, if the pop audience bought these records because they thought they were watching a soap opera of this fucked up married couple who are now divorced, but they'll always be in love with each other. And wow, it must be so crazy behind the scenes because they're really in love with each other, but they're both married to other people. You know, if the pop audience bought these country musicians because they thought these country people were more fucked up and it was like a soap opera, good. That's why Billy Sherrill wanted them to buy the records. That's why he put the story out there this way. So it's just all a product of who it was being sold to, not necessarily what it was, you know. Tasha's called George Jones a cipher, meaning he didn't understand what he was singing. Yeah, I think that there are a lot of examples of someone like a writer coming into the country music world and asking questions and I'm going to be the one to tell the world your story, etc. And that shit can shut down an interview real fast with a country artist. There's a great example. I don't remember which title it was. There've been 2 or 3 books written on Townes Van Zandt, and one of them, the author straight up says, like, "I tried to talk to Guy Clark, and he basically told me to go fuck myself." So, yeah, man, like, he probably did tell you to go fuck yourself. George Jones probably didn't wanna talk to you, Nick Tosches, because you probably showed up and were trying to get him to, play this Jerry Lee Lewis character, and he's not that. Very, very much not that. So if Nick Tosches knew that George Jones drunk lawnmower story or heard any other story about George Jones, getting wasted and smashing up a nightclub or smashing up a hotel room, he probably showed up trying to get this dude to act all crazy. And then when he met George Jones, had to have been flabbergasted at the reality of, oh, this is a human being. This is a human being with extreme anxiety issues. He's not who I thought he was. I have already said something to him that lets him know I think he's a person that he's not. And now he's not going to talk to me. So how do I write this story? And the answer to that is George Jones is a mystery. George Jones is unknowable. You cannot know George Jones. And he's probably too stupid to even understand his own songs. Just nonsense, just pure fucking nonsense. As a result of being a cultural tourist and getting spotted as a cultural tourist. And yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised that Nick Tosches got George Jones completely wrong. Garrett Cash, not a Nick Tosches fan, never have been. Nice to finally hear somebody else who sees it the way I did reading his books. The Jerry Lee book is supposed to be badass, but it's embarrassing to me. Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. If y'all don't know Garrett Cash, he's a humongous fan of country music and rockabilly. He's got some radio shows and podcasts out there. Check him out. Someone was asking for music show recommendations. I would recommend Garrett Cash's stuff. And yeah, this is someone who is deeply entrenched in this world and has been a fan of this music for a long time. And when he reads someone like Nick Tosches, it's embarrassing. It really is embarrassing because this Nick Tosches is a very respected author. Like if you go to a party in New York and start talking about country music, the first thing that's going to get brought up is Nick Tosches, and because they believe him, you know. And there are things like libelous things in his book on country music, The Twisted Roots of Rock and Roll. I don't know how he was not ever sued for. Like he said that Tom T. Hall wrote this song with an extremely racist title, and I was never able to find any reference to that song's existence anywhere else. Yeah, and he also had to formally issue a retraction for going to print with a bunch of stuff that he had good reason to believe was probably not true. He's obsessed with Emmett Miller. He's obsessed with blackface recordings. He's obsessed with the fact that Roy Acuff once recorded like obscene joke songs and then went on to record gospel songs. He's obsessed with this idea of tearing down the quote unquote purity culture of country music. But it's a puerile fascination, man. He wants Jerry Lee Lewis to get drunk and say the N-word. Like that makes Nick Tosches happier than anything. And it's not tough. It's not badass. I am not sorry for talking shit on Nick Tosches. Sorry. I'm just not. Yeah. So then like the podcast, there are multiple chapters on bullfighting. This one is really beautiful to me. Like the lines of it, there's an elegance to this photo that is very befitting to what is about to be talked about. I think that the illustrations and the way that there is an illustration at the beginning of each chapter, I think and hope will cut down on some of the confusion that comes with the podcast. You press play on a podcast and this dude's just talking about bullfighting, no explanation. Yeah, I could see how some folks might think this must have gotten mixed up in the RSS feed. I must be listening to a different podcast than the one that I press play on. But with these drawings there, and they are of the subject matter that you're about to read about. So there is more of a visual indicator there that what you're experiencing is not a mistake. What you're experiencing is not an accident. There is forethought and intention to everything that's about to happen. And I really think that Wayne did a magnificent job of giving you a visual representation of what's about to happen from a story standpoint. You see this image, and before that was this image, with the other George Jones bit in between. But the last bullfighting image you saw was this sort of like circus performer acrobat thing. So to go from this kind of bullfighting to that kind of bullfighting is the story that I'm telling you. How did we get from this like thing that even looked barbaric to this thing that is still barbaric but looks like a dance? And this art does that, and then you read that. That's what you read after seeing it, and hopefully intuiting it. Like, wow, this kind of bullfighting looks different than the last kind of bullfighting, and then you find out, yes, it is very different, and here's why, and here's how that happened. Good old Melba. Little Melba and Jones stuff. And I think that this is a great example of what I was talking about earlier, of like there's something to the way that Wayne uses these atypical approaches to line work that creates an image. You hold it back here and you can tell what you're looking at, but you get closer to it, and these lines that are in there, it implies something about what's going on in a way that even a photograph, like if you were to look at a photograph of these two people, you wouldn't intuit things that Wayne's line work makes apparent on some level. I've been hearing lots of music in my favorite video games from artists mentioned on the podcast. Kind of nice seeing them intertwine in a way. Ellie, not so smelly. I would be interested to know what video games are putting classic country music in them. That's pretty cool. Ooh, sorry. The chat keeps like fast forwarding as I'm scrolling it all the way to the end, so I have to scroll up a bit to catch up. Will there be an edition available on Kindle? Yeah, I think there already is. I mean, it's not released. I think it'll come out in September along with the book. But I think most websites where you can place a pre-order for the hardcover, I think you can also pre-order the Kindle. I don't have a Kindle, so don't quote me on that. I don't know exactly how that stuff works. And I guess I should also say a lot of people have problems figuring out how bookshops.org works. It's basically just a resource to find a local bookstore. And if their website, if the book doesn't show up in the results yet, yeah, it takes different servers and different, websites, different amounts of time to populate with the data that they get sent. So I don't have anything to do with whether the book is showing up or not, but any bookstore that's near you should be able to place a pre-order for you. And I would like to make it clear that it makes no financial difference to me where you order your book. I'm not like getting more, I'm not getting a kickback from bookshops.org. I'm not getting paid royalties. I'm not getting paid royalties on any of these books for a while. But just because of the way that like book advances work, it's different than how an advance for a record works. But I mean, like, there's a solid chance that I will never get a royalty check for this book. So, and that's fine. That's totally fine with me, and I think it's fine with everyone else involved on the back end of this thing from a business standpoint. Like, this book can be considered a success without it ever reaching the point where I get a royalty check. And so, like, my concern is not with like how many copies the book sells or uh, chart placement. That's cool. Um, but something that I have known my whole life, just from being around uh, a lot of folks who, as part of their work, obsess with things like chart placements, like getting a top 10 record or getting a number one record. Something I realized a very long time ago is that is not an achievement. Getting a top 10 record is not an achievement. Getting a best selling book is not an achievement. That is just a way that we have to measure what the actual achievement is. And the actual achievement is making something that enough people like and enjoy, to where whenever someone tallies the numbers down the road, it ends up looking like this. But it is nonsense to like chase number one anything. So my hope for this book is literally just to get this story in front of more people. um I would love for all of you who have a library card to ask your local library to order a copy for you to check out. And the more people do that, it turns into a wait list at the library. They order more copies, and then that copy is there. Even if people aren't going into the library knowing that they want to check out my book, if they're browsing the country section and that library's got a copy of it, it's sitting there. And I try to do everything. I do have a background in marketing, and I try to do everything to build a brand, to build a look, and then, like, even so, if someone picks this book up and they flip to a random page and start reading about bullfighting, I want that, like, to me, that is an intentional part of the branding of what I'm doing. I want them to be like, "What's going on here?" Flip to a different page. Maybe it's about country music, maybe it's about the Protestant Reformation, and I want that to, like, ask a question that needs to be answered. I mean, that's, like, the most important thing that you can do in marketing, is put a question in someone's mind that they feel compelled to find the answer for. And, yeah, so getting this book on shelves, I think, will do that. And then another great thing about putting this in book form is as a reference material. I'm aware that the podcast has been assigned as curriculum in college courses around the world at this point. But it does still have those problems that I mentioned with audio. Like, you're scrubbing through audio, you're looking through the transcript, trying to find stuff. And then with the book, with the index, it's there. If someone is in a library that has a section like country music reference, this could go right there. And then all of the all of the errors that I point out in the early popular books on country music, like Country Music USA and the Nashville Sound, this is the first time that a book will be sitting on the same shelf as those books. This is the first time that someone will have just as much odds of grabbing a book that has the correct information as opposed to has the incorrect information. And I know that I'm not going to solve all the problems right away. I know that Country Music USA and the Nashville Sound are still going to have, wrong information get cited in research papers and books going forward. But now we've got a dissenting opinion in print from Simon and Schuster. And I mean, like, that's a huge deal too. You can get a book on music published by a university press or a specialty press, a press that does, mostly books on music. But for Simon and Schuster to get behind this is a huge deal, really big deal. And so yeah, as far as sales go, cool. But to me, that is just a byproduct of the real accomplishment. The real accomplishment is getting this story out there and getting it in front of people. How perfect is Wayne White's art? Not really a question, just a celebration. Yeah, man, agree. I will keep going here. So, and then this is going to be the chapter that is the intro on Western wear. So just like a kind of a mock up, a fake ad for if you would see Western wear back in the day. It's really cool. It's very cool. Like there's so much subtlety to the spills and the brushwork, and then very detailed work too, which I like a lot about his style. Like to me, it says, yeah, I can do this other stuff, but I would rather do it this way. I can do like regular art, but I would rather have it be. Uh, I would rather make it look like this. Have you read Nancy Jones' new book, Playing Possum? Yes, I have. If so, did it shed any new light on your knowledge of George Jones? What is your opinion of her book as far as truthfulness? Yeah, I read the book. Did it shed any new light on my knowledge of George Jones? Not really. I talked about this in a Patreon update when the book came out. I read the whole thing. It really sort of proves a lot of things that I have said about using sources that are too close to the story. There are a lot of really, really obvious, verifiable, objectively verifiable errors in Nancy's book about George Jones' career, like his music career. And it's not surprising. That is not a surprise to me, because as I have said, when this is just your life, like when George Jones is your husband, you don't have the relationship with his career that a fan does or a historian does. You've never had a reason to go back and find out what month this recording session happened, and that's like a very deep cut thing to try to find out. But I mean, she's like making references to the first times a song appeared being 25 years after the song actually came out, the original recording of the song came out. And that's because this was just a song that she like saw George perform in concert all the time. And if she pulled up a recording of it, it very well may have just been some re-recording or like the version that came from Bradley Barn with Tammy Wynette years down the road. And she may have never heard the original recording of that song. And it's because to her, George Jones is a person, like a person that she loves, not a career that she's trying to get all the facts straight on. So yeah, there are errors there, and there will be errors in nearly any book that is written by someone who was there, even someone who was in the band. Like I was in a country band, like I know how this shit works. I was in a country band and around country bands. And when you're working, like if you get hired to work for some legendary country figure, you're coming on board and there's all this existent mythology in place. Like band members who have been in the band will fill you in on all the stories of everything that happened, but like they weren't even there when that stuff happened. They were filled in on the story also by the person who was in the band when they joined the band. Then you're in the band, then the next person's in the band, and you're telling them stories that were told to you by someone who wasn't there, right? And there's no reason to fact check any of this because it's not a trial. Like you're not in a courtroom, you're not under oath. This is just a good story. So like, why would you fuck up a good story by going and trying to find out if it was really true or really happened that way, And there's a lot of that in, this guy was there. And that's why you can't just take a camera and put it on the last person who's still alive that was in the room and hit record and tell them to just start talking about what happened. Because one thing that's going to happen a lot of the time is all of a sudden the person that's still alive just got way more important to what was going on. A lot more things become their idea. Yeah, that was my idea. Who's going to tell you it wasn't? I'm the only one who's still alive. Uh, and there's a lot of that, not necessarily in Nancy's book, but there's a lot of that everywhere. Like in any documentary that's ever been made, where they just put a camera on someone who was there and let them start talking. It's bad news, And I have turned down every single documentary that has asked me to appear in it as a talking head for this reason, because I don't know who they're going to put a camera on and how they're going to edit what I say to make it look like what this person is saying is something that I've like fact checked and approve of their story or whatever. There's so much sketchy shit that happens in documentaries and memoirs and biographies. Do I think that any of that was happening in Nancy Jones' book? No, not necessarily. Uh, Most of the stories that she tells have already been told, sometimes several times. And I didn't see any like major deviations from her versions of those stories. I thought it was sort of interesting that she seems to still be rolling with the there was a criminal conspiracy to keep George Jones addicted to cocaine story. Like, I don't know, I didn't really get the sense that she ever questioned how much he almost had to be in on whatever conspiracy was happening. There was a lot of details regarding what their day-to-day lives together were like that have never been anywhere else. So if you were interested in, what it was like to be married to George Jones, particularly when it comes to his problems with money, there is a sentiment about Nancy uh, in country fan circles and in industry circles. There's this idea that she is almost like a George Ritchie figure, like very money minded. It's a myth that was put forth in that George and Tammy series on Showtime. There are certain people who have certain incentives to cause Nancy to appear as if she is a gold digger, basically. I don't believe that's true. I believe that anyone who reads this book will get, or her book will get, an understanding of how little George Jones truly understood about the way that money works. I can't remember the exact figure. It was maybe like $10,000 or something, but she said there was a magic figure where if you asked him to do something, he would say, yeah, sure, $10,000. And then he would just do it no matter what it was. And that's a really bad way to approach handling business. And so, Nancy stepped in and put a stop to that. And she should have. She needed to. And of course, if you're one of these people who used to come to George Jones and tell him you'd give him $10,000 to do something, you don't like the fact that there's now this person standing there saying, dude, price went up. Like, you can't take advantage of his on disinterest in money. You just, that's done. We're not doing it that way anymore. And so, yeah, a lot of people would think that she was more concerned with money. But that's because they were used to being able to take advantage of George Jones on when it comes to his money. So that was insightful. That was the most new, insightful information that I found. And then, as a reader, there's a ton of shit in the book that I found really like annoying and uninteresting to me. Like, I didn't need to hear about Kirk Webster, being a great guy when it's pretty obvious that he's not a great guy. And I don't understand why all of that was in the book. And there's a lot of testifying in the book, a lot of just preaching in the book, like on religious matters, that I don't think anyone was really buying a book about George Jones to read. So, yeah. I'm gonna check on some more of these. I guess I can pull another drawing. Yeah, there are 30 of these. So here is the one for the chapter on Pappy Daily. So on the podcast, this would be the episode that is called Pappy Daily, Gene Pitney, and how George Jones came to be on MusiCore. And this was one of the chapters that received a lot of heavy editing in the book. Uh, the podcast takes this sidebar into Johnny Ray. And again, that is because the podcast is an audio medium. I have you here. I can make you listen to clips. And if I'm going to be making you listen to clips of Gene Pitney singing, you need to understand why he's singing like that. His voice is distinctive and bizarre in a lot of ways. And I felt it was a good idea in the audio format to dive in to why he was singing that way. But just story, if you're over here doing the story in book form, yes, there's a lot you need to understand about the music, but that's not necessarily one of them. To get into the story of George Jones and all of the record label machinations happening with Art Talmadge, United Artists, MusiCore, all of this stuff, that sidebar into Johnny Ray could have been a little bit off the path for some people. So I cut all the Johnny Ray stuff out entirely. And then what's left is you really have just like focusing in on the story of George Jones' sort of passive role in his own career. And this illustration is another good example of why the artwork can't be full page. So there's that splotch up in the corner, which again, I'm not going to get into what I think is going on with these, but I will point out that this is the same as this right here. Like if you look at the lines that you're being given, it's very similar. And there are certain shapes that recur throughout the artwork, and that top right corner would have been completely lost if we printed the art full page in the book. So it's a good example. If you could be best friends with one, either Tammy or George, which one would you pick and why? Man, neither. I think that having either one of these people in your life had to be, they both seem, great in a lot of ways, and at a lot of times, I could see how it would be really awesome to hang out with Tammy Wynette or George Jones on some days, but having this be a life that you care about, and then watching the decisions that this life that you care about is like forcing upon itself, it would just be brutal. I mean, like, I don't know how many of you have ever known a hardcore addict, like not just like a functioning alcoholic, like, probably all of us know some functioning alcoholics, but a fucking addict, that's not an easy relationship to have. And I'm not saying that they're bad people or anything. I'm just saying, as far as like your own emotions are on the line in that relationship. And like, I'm a really emotional person, and the people that I care about, I care a lot about them. And it would be hard to watch. It'd be hard to have a front row seat to Tammy Wynette or George Jones on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, I would be best friends with Billy Sherrill over them. He was someone who seemed to have more distance from the work, from the job, like a healthy relationship with the themes that was in his work. He could write a song without having to live the song, which is, especially the older I get, an admirable quality in a creator, someone who could do these things without internalizing these things, someone who can sing about fucked up stuff without being fucked up and without fucking up everyone's lives around them. Can't wait for the book and the next season. Are there more stories to tell, like from season 1? Yeah. When I announced the book, there were quite a few people who asked if this meant like the podcast was over or something. And no, everything that I've said I'm going to do, I'm still going to do. I'm going to keep making the podcast. The podcast is the number one priority. This was like day one specified in every conversation that I had with every publisher when I went to New York to pitch the book adaptation. The podcast has to be first. Like Simon & Schuster and I did agree that it would make sense to pull the transcripts of the episodes off the website for at least a period of time when the book first goes on sale. Those transcripts have been there for close to 2 years at least, and freely available. If someone goes to find them and they're not there, I have put a message that says, look, this came out as a book. Please consider buying it, or at least requesting that your library order a copy. I'm not saying you need to give me money for this now. There are ways to get the text version of this. The Dallas Frazier episode's not in the book, so that transcript is still on the website, but the podcast is still first. Like the audio version of the podcast is the most important thing. Like that's not getting pulled ever. And that's always going to be the first thing I do, and it might be more work for me. This was a lot of work writing season 2 as a book, then turning it into a podcast, then turning it back into a book is a lot of extra work when I could write the book, release it as a book, and then release it as a podcast. But that's not how I found an audience. This project found an audience as a podcast, and I'm not going to walk away from that, because it makes me think of so many mistakes I have seen creators make in their career, or even like country artists going pop or whatever. Like once you get big, completely changing the thing that you're doing because you can make more money doing it a different way. I don't care. I went deep into credit card debt to make season 1 of this podcast, and prior to that I once had to donate blood plasma to afford grocery money. Like I've never been rich, and I don't care if I ever get rich, because anything above donating blood plasma and going into credit card debt is fucking great. Like this is all aces as far as I'm concerned. So there's no thing in me that needs to get a big check all at once. I am fully invested in this as my future. So whatever comes from that, it's been made very clear to me that whatever comes from that will be enough. And I am very happy with enough. I don't need more. So yes, the podcast will always continue. If I'm doing anything, I will be doing the podcast. This is another fantastic one. And again, just a ton of action in the image. And again, there's a very clear through line from the first intro on bullfighting through all the jousting and Catherine de Medici and Protestant Reformation stuff. I've talked a lot about this on Patreon, but I wrote that as one giant piece of text. Again, when I write, I just open up a blank document and go. There's no like this will be a paragraph, this will be a paragraph, this will be a chapter. It's just write the full thing that you're writing and then figure out where it goes and what to do with it later. So that specifically was the thread that I was following, that I had no idea what was going to happen. Like it would have, if you just take all those intros, every intro from the first bullfighting intro through the final Catherine de Medici one after that wedding ends in the massacre of all the Protestants. If you take all of that and add it together, that's one section of writing. And I had to figure out how to break that up in the podcast, which I did. And a lot of people had some trouble figuring it out. I think most listeners didn't have any problems figuring it out, and most listeners seem like truly shocked at how confusing that was to the people that it was confusing for. But having these visuals in place, I think, will make it more accessible, make it a little bit easier for folks to understand what's going on, because here, bullfighting, okay, more bullfighting, and then Western wear, and then horses. Like there's a through line here just with the animals and the culture that's being talked about. Like obviously cowboy boots exist because of horse riding, and now here are these guys on horses. So I think that there's like a visual element that will carry this theme through in book form, and then it would take a long time to like unpack all of the parallel themes of that thread from bullfighting through the Medici stuff. But as it happens in the story, it sort of resonates with things that are happening in the George Jones storyline, and then connects into the Tammy Wynette storyline, which begins at the same time. And there's all like these themes like sort of like shift to attach themselves to both of these separate storylines, and then as they converge is when like George and Tammy come together. Again, can't take a ton of credit for that as far as planning goes. I didn't know I was going to do this, when I started it, but I did see how it came together and package it in a way that allowed it to come together that way. And yeah, again, I think Wayne never asked me a single question about what something meant in the podcast. I think that he heard the episodes first time through and understood exactly what I was doing the whole time, which was another reason why I immediately wanted him to do the artwork for this. And if he had said no, I didn't even have a backup list. Like if I went to Wayne White and said, I have a book deal, will you do the art for the book? And if he had said no, I would have had to start from scratch because I didn't have a backup plan or a short list, nothing. This is Virginia Wynette Pugh. And then, yeah, I think having these, they're almost like mile markers through the book, with each chapter, you get a piece of art that tells you what's about to happen. Just truly phenomenal stuff here. I can't draw at all, but I do know enough about visual art to understand that this guy is a genius. And just the splatter. I mean, I have spent a long time staring at these, and it almost feels like useless to be holding them up to a webcam right now. I hope that y'all are getting some sense of how incredible this artwork is. And once you have the book in your hands looking at it, I think you'll really see what's going on. I mean, look at this. Just phenomenal stuff, right? I'm really excited for everyone to get their hands on these. And I think that Wayne really has a sense about the true spirits of George Jones and Tammy Wynette. I think that he gets them in a very real way that you can't take for granted that anyone would understand them from their songs or something like that. Got to the video late. Has Wayne drawn Peanut Montgomery? No. There's not a drawing of Peanut Montgomery in the book. I'm curious if you have a topic for season 3 of the podcast. I'd love to see another deep dive into another artist. Yeah. So the format or the approach to formatting the stories is gonna bounce back and forth between seasons. So the odd numbered seasons, like season 1, 3, 5, etc., those are gonna be the same, like the same approach, which is like a lot of different stories with some commonalities between them. Like in season 1, the Bakersfield Sound was sort of a through line. What it's like to be a woman in, I guess, like post 1950s country music was a through line. So that, like, you can expect some themes to be reoccurring, but it will be more of like an umbrella approach, like just putting all this stuff into a collection sort of stories. And so that'll be what season 3 is. And then like the through lines will generally be like gospel music, folk music, and bluegrass music. That and I knew that I was going to be doing those themes after season 2, so I knew that a lot of the European history that was in season 2, I expected that to come with season 3, but then the deeper I got into researching George Jones and Tammy Wynette and like the subject matter of their songs and the history of the industry that was like that they were a part of, I realized that all of that had to come sooner. Like the bullfighting through Medici Protestant Reformation stuff had to happen to tell the George Jones and Tammy Wynette story correctly. So season 3 is going to feel like a continuation of those aspects of the story, as well as a continuation of certain aspects of season 1, which I think would be pretty obvious if you just go back and listen to it, knowing the direction that I'm headed. And then the even numbered seasons will be deep dives into specific artists. I do know who season 4 is going to be about, but I am not going to say it because there are a lot of reasons I'm not going to say it yet. But yeah, I've known what the first 5 seasons thematically will touch on since before I started working on the first one. And then like at that point, I always hate to have too much of a plan, like I didn't know that these themes were going to be 5 seasons of the podcast. I just knew which order I was going to hit these themes. And then after making the first season, realize, okay, these are all like separate seasons of this podcast for sure. And it was more of a plan than I ever really have. Being coming from the background of a touring musician, I didn't like book the shows or anything. I just like went where I was told to go, and I didn't know where I was going to be, a month in the future. So the way that my brain works is not super conducive to having a plan very far in the future. So knowing that the plan I do have will play out across, years and 5 seasons of this show, it seems like to just at that point probably take a break, and then think about where to go next. But I I don't imagine that I could ever, quote unquote retire. I just doesn't seem like something I would ever want to do, sit around not doing anything. And and that's aside from the fact that I think that what I'm doing is really important uh beyond just like a job, I think that I'm in a position to do a lot of stuff that probably nobody else is in a position to do. Like now that I've gotten all of the attention that I've gotten on doing this work the way that I'm doing it, it's not something that I could just walk away from ever. Like just because I get old, don't I don't need to retire, so I'm probably not going to retire. I'm probably just going to do this until I physically can't do it anymore. Yeah, so that's the plan. A number one record is a rose adorned wreath. Yeah, exactly. It's exactly that, and that is one of the reasons why I wanted to get into that aspect of the Roman fascination with Greek culture and how they sort of got the physical award mixed up with what the award was for, and how one thing is actually an accomplishment and the other thing is just the visual trapping associated with an accomplishment, but not an accomplishment in itself. So yeah, that is how I feel about number one records. I'll keep going for a while longer here. If y'all want to keep typing questions in the chat, if you have questions, make sure to get them in. I do have almost the entire rest of this week. I will be doing more streams, so I have to limit how much I'm talking a little bit in consideration of that, but I could go for probably another half an hour here at least. So if anyone has questions that I haven't touched on, I am about halfway through these drawings, so I'm trying to get through some more of them. And you got old Kathy. And yeah, again, once you have the book in your hand and you can like flip back and forth between images and look at the visual elements that are common between certain ones, it's really, really cool to do. This is another one of my favorite ones. And this is another example of Wayne taking an image that we're all familiar with because it was sold to us and then drawing it in a way that implies things that a photograph never would or could. This image specifically is sort of a reference to a series of photographs that were sold as a pamphlet when Jones and Tammy did the Plantation Music Park in Florida. Part of the sales pitch was come hang out and see a concert where George Jones and Tammy Wynette live. Like, look, their house is right over there, and they would sell a souvenir book. And this used to be, I haven't really gotten into this in the show ever, but this used to be a huge thing at country music concerts, selling the program. Like if you ever go to a play now, you'll probably get a program. Or if you go to like an awards ceremony, you'll get a program. Back in the day, country variety shows or review shows or package tours, like the Grand Ole Opry tours, they would sell programs for those books, like with bonus pictures of the acts that you were seeing and like a little bio and just whatever else, so naturally when George Jones and Tammy Wynette, or really Jones, like pull Tammy into doing the whole park thing, but naturally he would sell a program the same way, Sorry if that was loud. There's a storm here, so I just got a weather alert. And hopefully I don't lose electricity. I live in Nashville, so about 1 in every 10 storms completely takes my power out. But yeah, George did a program for Lakeland, and they did a whole photo shoot of pictures like this, and then sold those programs. So this image is literally like a billboard. It's literally an advertisement for their marriage, which is kind of a crazy thing to do. But it's also probably feels familiar to everyone now in the social media age of Instagram, where so many people are like curating and presenting a version of themselves on social media. Like almost everyone in American society, at least now, has some sense of what this is like now, but when they came out with these pictures and were selling these programs, it wasn't like that. There was very much like I'm in the audience, they're on the stage. But now we're in a society where everyone's kind of on the stage a little bit. And, perhaps that is one thing that has led to the stories that I tell about the entertainment industry resonating in a way that they haven't seemed to resonate with people in the past. How do you do most of your research? Stoned. Yeah, being stoned helps. The, the the internet is a huge tool that was not available to most of the people who came before me. So, and then I have a lot of respect for the most of the journalists and authors whose work I occasionally have to correct. I had to correct errors in Bill Malone's Country Music USA, but like, I mean, it was a huge error, but there's a lot of great information in that book, and he was kind of the first guy to even try. So you got to respect that. And at no point am I saying we should like burn that dude's books or throw them in the trash or anything like that. it, he was working with the tools that he had available to him. He was working with the information that he had available to him. It's not surprising to me that he came to Nashville after Owen Bradley had sold the Quonset hut and moved out of town, and it looked like Chet Atkins was the guy. Chet Atkins or Bill Malone comes to Nashville and looking around Music Row, finding out what the story is. There's no fucking statue of Owen Bradley on the corner like there is now. So it's Chet Atkins is still there. He's still taking meetings. Everyone is still trying to get a meeting with Chet Atkins, and Owen Bradley's outside of town, not giving a shit. So yeah, it makes perfect sense that he would think that Chet Atkins was the guy. And Nashville Sound, Paul Hemphill, same thing. It makes perfect sense that they would think what they thought, and they did not have the research tools available to them to find out other stuff. So the internet is huge for me. YouTube is huge for me. Streaming, not so much. Spotify, Pandora, Apple Music, all of them across the board are very, very bad at classic country music. They're just bad at it. They probably, okay, so there's a lot of stuff that happens at Spotify to make playlists that I think most folks assume is an algorithm, because Spotify would love for you to think that it's an algorithm. But the fact is, if you ever find a playlist that is worth half a fuck, it's not an algorithm. A person did that. And then, whichever company it is that would like you to believe their algorithm is great may eventually downsize how many real people are working and let the algorithm really do it. Maybe the algorithm can take over from here. And then that's when your playlists go to shit, is because algorithms are really, really bad at curating music. They just are. There's no indication that they will ever get good at it. And that's a fact. So when it comes to like classic country music, you need a human being who knows what's up, and they just don't have it there. YouTube, on the other hand, is flooded with people like Garrett Cash. Garrett goes out and buys records from the bargain bin that he has no idea what they are and listens to them and puts them on the internet. And that's it. Like that's the whole end game there. It's just like, here's something I found. And then for someone like me, if one of those records happens to be some rare thing from some artist that I'm trying to find more information out about, then that's fantastic. Like, I don't have to spend my life looking for a physical copy of this record that is hopefully in good enough condition for me to listen to it and find out whatever I need to find out from it. So, my research process, I start by putting together a stack of books that I know I'm going to need to read to talk about a topic. And I also have to keep in mind that if I'm talking about anything, I'm talking to some of the people I'm talking to have been paying attention to this for 40 years, 50 years. They have decades of experience in this thing. So if I'm going to talk about it, I need to know that what I'm saying is accurate. I need to know what I'm saying is correct. So there's a stack of books that I know I have to read just for that. And most of the books in that first stack will be like overview books. Like Neil Rosenberg's Bluegrass: A History is on the shelf behind me. Like that's a book in this category. And in that, I get a sense of, here's the larger story that I need to tell. And this is an odd numbered season, so I'm doing that through a bunch of different little stories. So I start looking for who that is or what song that is. Like, here's one song that I can tell a bunch of the big story through this one song or through this one singer or this one songwriter. And then it gets more granular. Is there a book about this one person or that talks about this one song a lot? Cool. That goes in this second stack of books that I got to read. Probably not, though. There's probably not a book on that one person or that one song or that one songwriter. So then it becomes a matter of, okay, I have to do this. So getting really fancy with operators in Google search, like quotes, hyphens to exclude certain things that I don't need anymore, and go all the way to the end, like all the way to the end of the search results, not just page 1, page 2, and make notes of everything that I think might be useful, might be a part of the finished version of the story. And then it gets more and more granular, like all the way through YouTube, just to find those random records that may have been uploaded or whatever else. And then, now that the Country Music Hall of Fame archives are available to me, go through there and kind of the same thing. I can take headphones and plug them into a computer. Most everything they have is digitized. Some stuff's not. Some stuff is still physical. But I'll start with the digitized stuff, and then look at the physical stuff that's in folders and boxes later. And yeah, and then the thing about being in the Hall of Fame is I don't have like a key, so I can only go in there when they're open, and a person has to be in the room with me. Like, I don't get left alone in the archives, so like I am objectively an inconvenience while I'm there. Not that anyone has ever complained about it or would complain about it, but I know that I'm being an inconvenience while I'm there. So I try to not waste the time that I'm in there. When I'm in there, it's full input, like just raw data input. Write everything down as fast as I can write it down, so I can get out of here and let these people do the very important work that they're doing. And then I take all that home, and I'll like unpack it at home, process it at home, figure out what I have, draw the connections, figure out if I need to go look into something else later, and that's all just like facts and information and sources and fact checking things. When it comes to the music itself, a lot of the time, if I'm not just straight up writing the whole time I'm doing all this data input stuff, I can listen to music, and I find it useful to listen to the music that I will probably be talking about. So I have very long playlists that are put together where I'll just put them on repeat and just listen to this stuff over and over to where it gets saturated in my mind. Because again, I'm going to be talking to people who have been listening to these songs, these recordings for 40, 50 years in some cases. So I need to try to get as familiar with these recordings as I can. As part of season 2, I pointed out a lot of like flaws, technical flaws that are in some George Jones recordings, like A Window Up Above. I only did that with a few examples, but there were probably like 40 George Jones songs where I heard like random audio artifacts and didn't mention them because I can't hear those recordings without hearing those artifacts in them anymore. And I didn't want to like do that to people. But like Mr. Fool, for example, there's a George Jones recording, Mr. Fool, that I make a very big deal out of. There is a certain sound that happens at a certain point in that song. I don't know what it is, uh, but like I hear it all the time, every single time. Like no matter, I don't even have to be listening on headphones. It's something that I expect to hear, so I can know that it's coming, and I'll hear it every time, whether it's on some shitty Bluetooth speaker or what. Uh, so yeah, if once I'm familiar enough with the recording to where that kind of thing starts happening about it, then I've got it on lock. You know, I can talk about that one. Obviously, the Miss America chapter, and I really love the way that they get sort of faceless as they go back. Very cool stuff. And the like as the story gets crazier, the some of the illustrations get more abstract, and this is to me where they get like way more powerful. um Again, I hope that this is coming through in the quality that I'm seeing on my screen, but there's sort of a sketch of Tammy with Burt Reynolds, then one with George Ritchie, and then that's Michael Tomlin with the chin. And yeah, just this sort of ephemeral compilation, almost, I guess, is very representative of the tabloid career Tammy Wynette love life was in at the time. Obviously, the soap opera chapter. This is kind of an interesting one. I don't know if this will show up on the camera or if you can see, but there are certain reasons that the first version of this didn't work. So I actually mailed this back to Wayne, and he drew a different scene for what's on the TV and pasted it in there. I don't think that is like obvious or will be obvious in the book, but just a neat little bit of trivia. Bobby Braddock, Curly Putman. Again, the detail on this is just insane. Yeah, there's no way that's going to come through in high quality enough to tell what's going on. But yeah, these are very cool stuff. The drag queens. I really kind of expect the whole, you know, political discourse to maybe have a whole other round of this. Like a lot of people would think that putting a history of drag in a country music podcast is, you know, not cool or whatever. But I think with a book, I I kind of expect it to hit a whole another round of why is this guy talking about drag queens, and especially because this book is coming out in September, which is the height of political insanity. Uh, so we'll see. Maybe I'll get banned in Florida. Probably would be the best thing that could happen from a PR standpoint. Will you do any touring for the book? Yeah, they're gonna do like book signings. I don't know how many or where. It's not really my department. I'm just obligated to show up. And I've kind of been thinking about this too loosely. Maybe y'all can tell me what you think about this, but the general thing to do at a book event is read from the book and do a Q&A and sign some books. Uh, it seems kind of weird to me to do that, and I've been flirting with this idea of, I mean, obviously, like, read something, but I've been flirting with this idea of, like, maybe I ask you questions. There's been a lot of me talking. There's been a lot of me getting interviewed, and I would like to get away from that, because I don't think that I'm the story here. I think that the work that I'm doing is the story here. And I think that in as much as I am the story, or I can be part of the story or whatever, I think that's been done. I mean, between what Jeff Edgers did with the Washington Post and what Brett Martin did with GQ, the the story's been told, and there's no reason to like go back over it in interviews going forward. So I'm really kind of trying to get away from talking about like me as if I'm the interesting thing. And I would like to talk more about the work. But I would also be curious to learn more from about the audience. Like, I am very interested in where everyone is coming to this from. Like, I am aware that a lot of people listening to this podcast did not grow up listening to country music, and they're getting turned on to country music through this podcast. And I would just be curious to hear some people's, origin stories with country music. But I guess I'm just kind of like worried that a lot of folks don't show up to a book signing expecting to do public speaking, so I'm kind of worried that I'll want to do this and then no one's going to want to talk. But I don't know, I was kind of hoping that like I could start by talking about my relationship with country music, just like what it was like to grow up with the perspective of country music that I had. I can remember thinking that Barbara Mandrell must be the most famous person on the planet, because she was like on TV and hosting everything. And a lot of people don't even know who she is anymore. So I just figured I could like talk about kind of growing up around country music, and then maybe hear from some people. I mean, especially if I'm going to like Los Angeles to do signings and New York to do signings, it's just, yeah, talk about a little. And maybe I wouldn't talk about the same thing at every event. Like if I'm going to be in LA, could just talk a little bit about country music's relationship to that city, which is something that doesn't get talked about nearly as much as it should. And then Old Billy, which I love this. I like how small his head is when everyone thought he was like a raging egomaniac, and he really wasn't. Very cool. And yeah, like I said, I mean, my hope for the book is to reach a bunch of people who would never give a podcast the time of day, and just the word podcast, there are so many connotations that come with that. Almost everyone who hears that word is just going to think, oh, like Joe Rogan, or, oh, like a podcast that's trying to be like Joe Rogan, where it's just people sitting around talking on a microphone. Uh, and yeah, like that's not super interesting. Like, and obviously it's not what I'm doing, but it is certainly what most people would assume if you tell them, oh, I listen to a podcast about country music. And I think that there's a certain prestige that comes with a book that will get the story in front of people who wouldn't really give it a chance. um but and then as far as people who are already a fan of the podcast, yeah, I hope that a lot of them buy this book and enjoy it, and I do think that the artwork is an additional element that makes that worth doing. Um, But also, if I wanted to do like a souvenir or like a book souvenir version of the podcast, I could have just like printed the transcripts, and sold that to however many people were going to buy it. Um, so yeah, like I guess I don't want anyone to think that like they need to buy this to get more of the story or something, because like that's not what the book is for. The book is just season 2 as a book. Um, but yeah, I think that these illustrations really do a lot to add value to a book version on top of all of the reasons to do it that I've already mentioned, like the book as a research tool. Obviously, the artwork for the chapter on cocaine. This is one of my favorite ones, and it kind of scares the shit out of me. This is, the chapter where we get into D Doodle and the old man. And this is so my approach to collaborating with others is always just to find someone who does work that I like, uh, explain to them that I would like to work with them, explain to them why I would like to work with them, and then let them do whatever they're going to do. That's what I've always done in any type of collaborative process. Just find someone who does work that you like and let them work. This drawing is, I think, the only one that really came up in conversations when Wayne and I were talking about the different approaches that he could take. This was one of the ones where it was like, how are you going to do this? How is it possible to draw George Jones alternate identities? Like how do you draw drug hallucinations? And this is again one of the problems that I had with doing photographs. Like I could license a picture of George Jones looking like a zombie because he was in the thralls of, crippling cocaine addiction, but that's just gonna look like a fucked up picture of George Jones that we've all seen. That's not gonna show you how awful this was. And like Wayne and I batted about a couple ideas of like possibilities for what he could do here, but this is what he came up with, and it's fucking scary. I think it's really fucking scary. um and this is another one though where I'll find myself like staring at it, and it's got a magical quality to it. That's really the only way that you could describe it, I think. uh just this a remarkable achievement here. The three main literary inspirations for season 2 were obviously Moby Dick, um, but then also House of Leaves by Mark Danielewski, and Twin Peaks: The Return, the David Lynch, going back to Twin Peaks. Uh, anyone who's like a fan of horror, I think, would understand not only why those two pieces of work are so incredible and important, but also the influence that they had on the way that I told the story of season 2. So um, the the aspects of this story that are scary on purpose, and I needed them to be scary for people, because that to me is like kind of the most important missing element of what's going on when you tell a story of George Jones and Tammy Wynette. To me, everyone always tells it like, oh, that's so sad. No, that's fucking terrifying. It is fucking terrifying that this could be what life is like for someone, you know? um and so that was really important to me to capture that. And again, Wayne White understood that, and that's the only way you end up with this artwork. I mean, I don't know if there's like an award that he would be eligible for this book, but I hope he wins all of them. Buffalo Bill. I love this one so much. This is obviously Tammy in the KLF music video. I don't know how he did this background, but it's great. And that's one of my favorite spills too. Just spills down to the bottom. Yeah, and again, Wayne is the guy who did the art direction on the Smashing Pumpkins video Tonight Tonight, so sort of familiar territory for him thematically. Nudie. I haven't seen the scan of this yet for how it's going to look in the book. So I don't know if everything that is going on in this illustration is actually going to show up in the book or not, but really cool. Really excited for everyone to get their hands on these. And yeah, like towards the back of the book, like I said, it gets more abstract. And then so this is like the chapter that I think the episode would have been called Choices. The chapter that starts at the tail end of Jones still being addicted to cocaine through the sort of redemption era, and then Choices all the way through to his death. This is the drawing for that chapter, and it's really sort of a cosmic perspective on George Jones, where he's sort of, I guess, like fading out of existence in a way that is, like maybe indicative of certain aspects of the horror element of the story. Sorry, like I said, I'm not like a professional at talking about visual artwork, and there's a lot I don't want to say, like a lot that I'm keeping myself from saying because I don't want to influence what this means to people. Catch up on some more questions here. Do you have a favorite book that you've read as research for the podcast, or one that inspired your own storytelling or research process in a profound way? If I really have a lot of respect for certain authors. Like Colin Scott is someone who I will always name check. I think that his work is great and his approach to this is great. And he is someone who does not just tell you a story because it is sensational and wow, what a crazy story. He, like, even if he makes a reference to a story that is sensational, he'll tell you this could be bullshit. Like, there's no one else besides this one source that says this happened. And then he is also fantastic at getting data in the story that he's telling, like telling you this is the musician who played this part, like, because he knows as a fan listening to the record that that part is the musical hook of this record, who did that and why. So like he gets that and tells you, as opposed to just assuming that it's some shit that you wouldn't care about because you want to hear a story about a fucked up hillbilly, so he's great. And as far as like inspired my storytelling or research process, not I would say that no nonfiction writer has inspired the way that I write. The way that I write is much more similar to fiction. I basically do all of this stuff, research all of this nonfiction stuff, and then try to write it in a way that I would write a story if I was making it up from scratch. Like if I was a novelist, this is the way I would write sentences. These are the sentences that I would craft for you. And I mean, I can tell you the influences that I have there. Uh, Definitely, like Melville for sure. I love his because he's telling you a story and then he'll bring nonfiction into it. Like that's what was so inspiring to me about Moby Dick is the story's great, but then the like bravery to just get into all of this stuff that you don't need to know about whaling. Uh, or a lot of people would say you don't need to know about whaling, but it does something. It adds something. It achieves something in the story, and it achieves a sort of connection between the person telling the story and the person reading the story that I think just telling a story can't do. Um, so that was huge to me. Just Melville across the board, and I like not even necessarily Moby Dick. Like my favorite Melville is probably The Confidence Man, which is very short. If you are afraid of reading Moby Dick, The Confidence Man is a great short read. And then I like a lot of guys like I like Paul Auster a lot, Auster, Theodore Rozak. Those two. Rozak wrote a book called Flicker that is fiction but feels like not nonfiction. And Paul Auster wrote a book called Book of Illusions that is much more typical of a novelist voice, but also sort of has this quality of documentary to it, you know. Uh, but it's fiction, and I don't know. I really also am influenced by old school radio as far as the way that I build at least the bones, the structure, the architecture of the story, the way that Paul Harvey used to do the rest of the story, um, and Art Bell. Uh, that's more like a podcast, just like talk radio. So I wouldn't say that he influenced my writing style, but I do want to cultivate an aura that feels similar to listening to Art Bell Coast to Coast Radio. Because I mean, like if you listen to that show, the way that I first heard that show was as a kid on tour going down the road with like the driver listening to that at 3 in the morning in the middle of fucking nowhere, where like all you're seeing is like radio towers and like satellites in the sky and stars, and you're listening to adults seeming to discuss like whether or not their cat is an alien with a like straight face value conversation. And I'm a little kid and look up at this driver and they're just like smoking, drinking coffee, eyes ahead, listening to this like it's history class or some shit. And that's a wild feeling, and it's a wild it can affect the way you view the world. Is the world this magical place where my cat could be an alien? Fucking maybe, man, maybe. And I want to make people feel that way, not all the time, but sometimes. So there are things that I do to sort of play up the unknowable aspects of music or these stories. I will continue exploring this thread. Like this is a thing that's going to keep coming up. The lines between spirituality and religiosity and superstition, the places that country music comes from were often very superstitious places. You know, when you hear uh, like most histories of country music or country artists that are set in like the 1930s to 1940s or that time period as part of the background of the artist that you're talking about, like the Carter family or George Jones or whoever. uh, One thing that's going to come up in those histories is the border blaster radio stations that were from Mexico, and they did not have regulations on the strength that they could broadcast at. So those things, you could hear them in Canada, and they are like the Carter families down there playing on these radio stations, and then cut to the next program is a psychic call in with your questions. Like, it's carny shit. And for most of the existence of what we would call folk slash country music, that association with carny shit was like undeniable. It was like not even a question, you know. Oh, you're a country musician, which carnival do you travel with? And then the same thing, like, and that's the one of the tie-ins with bullfighting too. So I think that um evoking sort of a mystical way of looking at the world is not only fun and cool to do from a storytelling standpoint, but it is historically accurate. It is the most accurate way to get you to understand where this music comes from, is to also put all these ideas in your head. Um, and this is a total side note, but I think that something else that does this really well is the current season of True Detective. If anyone's watching that, True Detective Night Country, uh, it's a, returns to something that season one did very well, which was blur the line between this plane of existence and a possible other thing, a possible other plane of existence that could be intersecting with this one. um, I know so many people expected season one of True Detective to just like steer hard into a supernatural element, and it didn't. And I think that it was right to not do that. And I think this new season of True Detective is also doing that. It would surprise me if it leans all the way into like confirming the existence of supernatural things. I think it's going to continue blurring the line, but I think that that's one of the things that made season one of True Detective so successful. People want stories to be told in a way that is not all explained to them. They want illusions that there could be more. Um, because we all want there to be more to everything that's going on right now, you know. uh that's probably a whole different conversation to have. Where can I find Garrett Cash? Search his name. Dollar Country is the name of the thing that he was doing that I first became aware of. I think he's doing at least one other show now. But yeah, I assume he's all over the place. He's definitely posts in the Facebook group that I run, 20th Century Country Music on Facebook. You could search his name in there and find a lot of posts that he did. I know after season two got announced that he read read a lot of the books, like the main biographies, and then listened to all of George Jones' music. And he kind of like posted reviews of George Jones' career. Okay, yeah, I'm glad y'all are into Wayne's artwork so far. So yeah, this is obviously the chapter on roses through history, and I kind of wanted that to seem like almost a fever dream. That was like the loosest and most abstract thing that I've ever done on the podcast, is just like, we're going to talk about roses for a minute, and I'm not going to tell you why at all. And I don't know, I could just feel like I keep, like, pushing it a little bit, like, just pushing it a little bit further. In season 1, I was kinda nervous about how the intro to the Bobby Gentry episode would be received, where I was just talking about fame for 10 minutes, just a sort of a abstract analysis that never really goes anywhere about fame and, like, why would anyone wanna be famous, etcetera, which I just thought that was a really good series of questions to place in everyone's mind to talk about Bobby Gentry and MacGuffins, and I think there's a lot of really obvious parallels and connections. I mean, a lot of the proper nouns are just the same. Where again, and this book's going to have an index, so if you're confused, you can just look and see uh, all the other places where I talked about the same things that I'm talking about in the Rose thing. But yeah, I just kind of wanted it to come across as a little bit crazy, uh, a little bit wild, you know? Like this is very much a wild rose, not a garden rose. And then the end, which I also find this to be a very powerful image. I guess I don't really want to assign a quality to it beyond that because I'm sure this is the kind of thing that will mean something different to everyone else. And yeah, and this is the book will do the same thing that the podcast did, which is like return to the beginning for the end. So just a young Glenn. And that's the last one. So we're gonna wrap this up and just check these last few statements. Will you read the book like an audible release? I don't know if I'm reading the audiobook. That's one of the things that we've talked about in just kicking around possibilities for what may or may not happen. I uh, realize that all of you have no problem with my voice, but like I certainly think that we could get someone better than me to read the audio book. Uh, I don't know who that would be though. And I also one of the ideas that I had for it was maybe not just one person reading it. Um, but I don't know how that would look or who is even like on the table to as an option to get them to read the book. But I kind of thought that maybe just having a different person to read the non-musical chapters, like I don't know, sort of an academic tone to those because most of those are not written. Sorry, a minute ago when I was talking about like the way that I write and how I try to write like fiction, I guess I was only thinking of like when I'm writing about country artists and that stuff. Because when I'm writing the intros and the non-musical history parts of it, I am kind of trying to adopt a different tone. Like that's supposed to feel uh, different to the degree that maybe even like feel like a different person's writing those parts of it. It's supposed to be more academic, um, more like a classroom lecture than a story, you know? Um, so to me, it would make sense to have like one voice doing those and then a different voice or voices telling you the story like a traditional audiobook actor. I've never really been much of an audiobook person, but I have heard a lot of audio books in my life, and it's kind of incredible how good and how bad someone can be at reading an audiobook. Like there are some audiobooks where just the person reading it makes it unlistenable, and there are others where like the book might not even be that great, but the person reading it is doing such a great job that it, comes through. Okay, I think I'm gonna get out of here. All right. Yeah, I think I'm caught up with all these. Yes, I assume that if when I do book signings, that we will schedule like local radio appearances. Whatever podcasts are based out of the area, obviously, would make sense to appear on them, and like interviews with local alt weeklies. And I mean, like I said, I don't have financial incentive to prioritize local independent things. I just want to, because of who I am and what I would like to see in the world. In Nashville, we're very lucky to be able to have one of the best alt weeklies around, which is the Nashville Scene. It's such a great alt weekly that people who don't live in Tennessee subscribe to it. And I love that. And I wish that everywhere had something like that, and they don't. So I would like to support the ones that have managed to survive as much as I can, and try to make this a rising tide lifts all ships situation as much as possible. All right. Almost 3 hours on this one. Thanks for coming and hanging out with me. I'm going to be doing this for the rest of the week. So if anyone has uh, questions or thinks of a question that you wish you would have asked me, um, the that link tree page has the rest of the schedule of this week. So I'm doing another live stream tomorrow at 5, Wednesday at 5, and Thursday at 5. Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, whichever days those work out. So if you think of something that you wish you would have asked or anything like that, show up to one of those. I'm gonna be sitting here and trying to get as many people as possible to check out this artwork and check out this book. Again, if you haven't placed your orders, bookshops.org will help you find a local bookstore, and maybe the book will show up on the local bookstore's website, maybe not. If it's local to you, then you can just swing by and they will be able to place a pre-order for you, or you can call in and they will be able to place a pre-order for you. If you live in fucking Alaska and don't have a local bookstore, I understand. I get it. Like, I understand that not everyone can do the cool thing and support an independent thing. So whatever you got to do to get the book on your hands, yeah, if you don't agree with how it's priced at your local big box retailer, feel free to do whatever you've got to do to get the book. But I would appreciate you trying to support local independent bookstores if you can. If you do have a library card, it would be huge if you could ask your library to make sure to order a copy of this book. If enough people ask your branch to order this book, that there will be a wait list. They will order multiple copies of the book, and that's huge. Like, once the book is in the building, it's there. Someone's going to find it. Someone's going to read it. Someone's going to pick it up and open a page and hopefully have questions put in their mind that they need to answer by reading the book. And that's the coolest thing that can happen. So yeah, thank you all for your support so far. And I will be back tomorrow and the next day and the next day for more talking. All right. Take care of yourselves. How do I end this? There we go.